Most people picture Appalachia as banjos, coal, and a punchline. Almost nobody thinks to look at the ground. Hidden across these mountains are walls, chambers, and carvings that don't fit the people we say lived here, and a few don't fit the timeline at all. And by the last one, you'll see why one of these structures shouldn't exist on any calendar we've agreed to believe in. The wall that fences nothing. Walk the low ridges of northwest Georgia and you'll cross the first mystery without ever noticing. Long lines of dry-laid stone run through the trees, no mortar, just rock fitted to rock for stretches that add up to miles. Ask a local and you'll get the easy answer: old fence line, some dead farmer's property marker. The trouble starts the second you follow one to its end. They climb slopes no plow ever touched. They cut across hillsides where there was nothing to keep in and nothing to keep out. A fence is supposed to make sense. These make none. And here's the part that breaks the farmer theory completely. Some of these segments appear to predate the first European settlers entirely. So the man everyone blames may never have set foot here. What's left is a wall that encloses nothing, built by people who, on the official calendar, weren't supposed to be here yet. The fort that forgot to be a fort. Climb higher and the riddle drops its disguise. Near the top of Fort Mountain in North Georgia sits a wall of stacked stone, running about 855 feet along the ridge, zigzagging in a shape so deliberate the name stuck to the whole mountain. Everyone calls it a fort. Here's what nobody can explain. It defends nothing. No gate, no enclosed space behind it, no high ground held against a low one. None of the things a real fortification needs to work. What it does have is a line of shallow pits, and to this day, nobody can tell you what they held. And then it gets stranger. The Cherokee knew this country down to the last creek bed, and when asked about this wall, they didn't claim it. Their stories pointed backward, to an older people already long gone when they arrived. Sit with that. When the people with the deepest memory of a place tell you they inherited the mystery too, you're not dealing with something old. You're dealing with something older than memory. Someone was counting the sun. 200 miles north, the mystery goes quiet, and somehow that's worse. Up on the Allegheny Front in eastern West Virginia, certain ridgelines are scattered with cones of stacked stone, far too clean to be anything nature dropped. A rock slide leaves chaos. This is the opposite. Each pile is balanced, shaped, set one stone at a time by hands that wanted a cone, in that exact spot and nowhere else. And the spots are the whole secret. Several of these cairns sit along clear sight lines, and some of those lines point straight at the place on the horizon where the sun breaks through on the solstice. Picture what that took. Somebody stood on a freezing, wind-scoured ridge and watched the sky turn through an entire year. Then they marked the turning point in stone, so it could be read again next year, and the year after that. That isn't decoration, that's math, done without paper, by people who didn't need any. And everything so far, the walls and the piles, you could almost argue away. Almost, because the mountains are about to start talking, and what they say doesn't translate. The page nobody can read. In a quiet field in western North Carolina lies a slab of soapstone that is, by any honest description, a page of writing no living person can read. They call it Judicula rock, and its surface carries more than 1,500 separate carvings, swirls, lines, figures pressed into the stone. Across centuries, nobody can date. The Cherokee tie it to Tsul Kalu, a giant from the old stories, who left his seven-fingered handprint as he leapt across the land. It's one of the most densely carved stones in the entire eastern United States, and most people drive right past the turnoff. Here's the part that should keep you up. The style of these carvings doesn't match anything else nearby. It doesn't fit the record the way experts would prefer. So you stand over this slab knowing it meant something exact and urgent to someone. Knowing every mark was a deliberate choice, and knowing the key was buried with the hands that made it. When the argument drowns out, the answer. Tucked into a Georgia national forest sit 6 soapstone boulders carved with rings, crosses, animal shapes, and forms that look just enough like footprints to earn the place its misleading name, Track Rock Gap. The tracks aren't tracks. It's one of the largest clusters of rock carvings anywhere in the southeast, and that alone would earn its spot. But the real fight is uphill. There, stone terraces step across the mountainside in long, deliberate tiers, and the question of who built them set off an argument that has outlived most of the people who started it. Archaeologists with careful fieldwork on one side, theorists reaching for lost civilizations on the other. They've been swinging at each other over these terraces for years, and the stones just sit there, silent, indifferent to the noise. Hold on to that, because it's a warning. On this list, the loudest mysteries are almost never the deepest ones. The basement built for something that never ate. Along the spine of the Blue Ridge, on the line between Virginia and North Carolina, there are rooms hidden inside the earth, and you'd walk over one without knowing. From the outside, each reads as a low bump in the ground, nothing more. Step closer, and the bump becomes a doorway. The doorway becomes a chamber. Walls of fitted stone, roofed with heavy overlapping slabs, then buried under soil until the whole thing vanishes into the hillside. Some are too cramped to have sheltered anyone for long, which kills the simple explanation before you've finished saying it. And a handful line up with the sky, the doorway framing one specific sunrise on one specific morning of the year. The official verdict leans toward colonial root cellar, a cold store for potatoes. For plenty of these, that's true. But the root cellar answer has to look away from the alignment. It has to ignore the door that opens onto a sunrise and nothing else. That leaves you with a basement built into a mountain for something that never needed to eat. We're a handful in, and we still haven't hit the part where the timeline itself starts to bend. The refrigerator. The mountain built. Step out of human hands for a second, because not everything strange in these hills was stacked on purpose. In a North Carolina gorge sits a place locals call Bait Cave, and it's not the cave you're picturing. It's a fissure system, a massive jumble of granite boulders that sheared off the cliffs and froze mid-collapse into a maze of passages reported to be among the largest of its kind in the East. You squeeze between slabs the size of houses into chambers no architect ever drew. And then comes the detail that turns your skin cold. Literally. Air pours up out of the lower depths, and parts of this maze stay near freezing through the dead heat of a southern August. You can stand sweating at the mouth of it and be shivering 40 feet in shorts, in summer. Nature built a refrigerator inside a mountain and never explained why. The gateway aimed at one morning. In Tennessee, 2 forks of a river wrap around a high plateau like arms folding over something precious. On that plateau sits a 50-acre enclosure ringed by walls of earth and stone, roughly 2,000 years old. For generations, people assumed it was a fort, because what else do you call a big wall on high ground? But it never saw a battle, and it was never meant to. The walls are too irregular, the openings too wide and welcoming, the whole design indifferent to defense. So what was it for? The answer was written in the sky the whole time. The main entrance of the old stone fort, near Manchester, lines up with the summer solstice sunrise, framing the exact notch where the sun lifts on the longest day of the year. Picture it the way it must have happened. A crowd gathering at a stone gateway in the dark, breath fogging, waiting for a single thread of light to find the opening they built to catch it. It was made to watch the heavens, not to stop an enemy. From here, the mountains stop marking the sky and start burying their dead. And the scale of it is hard to hold in your head. The hill. That's actually a grave. On the flats above the Ohio River sits a town named Moundsville, and it was named for exactly one reason. Rising out of the middle of it is one of the largest cone-shaped burial mounds in the entire country, 62 feet of piled earth on a base wider than a football field, raised more than 2,000 years ago by the people we call Adena. Understand what that meant in a world with no wheels, no carts, no machines. This hill went up one woven basket of dirt at a time, hauled on human backs over years by a society organized enough to spend a generation building a monument for the dead. And most travelers blow past it without a second look. The mound got famous for one object, a small inscribed stone said to have come out of it in the 1830s, carved with characters scholars have fought over ever since. Real artifact to some, outright hoax to others. That fight never closed, and probably never will. But strip the controversy away, and one fact still stops you cold. There's a hill in the middle of an ordinary American town that is, from base to summit, a grave. The tomb they built a road around. A little deeper into West Virginia, the modern world does something almost darkly funny. In South Charleston stands the second largest burial mound in the state, an Adena earthwork raised with the same patient labor as the rest. And when the city grew up around it, nobody had the heart or the permits to move it. So they did the next best thing. They routed a road into a neat circle around its base. There's a sacred tomb sitting in the middle of a traffic circle, like a roundabout with a body count. A 19th century dig cut into the top and found human remains stacked inside, several people arranged with deliberate care, the mound doing exactly the job its builders intended, even as the town forgot to be impressed. And today, drivers loop past it hundreds of times a week without ever registering that the grassy hill in the median is somebody's grave. Nobody moved it. Nobody really studied it. The modern world just paved a ring around the dead and kept driving. The spa is the new part. Almost everyone who knows this next place knows it for one fact. George Washington bathed here. The warm springs in West Virginia's eastern panhandle, in a town that calls itself Berkeley Springs, have been a fashionable resort for so long that the resort completely swallowed what came before it. But those cut stone basins and channeled rock that move the water around weren't all dreamed up by powdered 18th century spa builders. This was a known, used, worked site for a very long time before any colonial gentleman decided the warm water was good for his joints. People had been shaping stone around these pools for generations, drawn to the one spot for miles, where the ground ran warm in the dead of winter. So here's the quiet joke buried in the brochure. The genteel little spa town is the newest layer. The spa is the recent part, and almost nobody soaking in that water ever stops to ask who did the real work first. That's roughly the first half of the map. Walls that fence nothing, forts that guard nothing, tombs in traffic circles. We're past the easy explanations now. Everything from here down gets harder to wave away. And the closer we get to the end, the quieter the experts get. The walls where no farm could live. Climb to nearly 4,800 feet up a high Allegheny ridge in West Virginia, and you'll find curving dry stone walls where no farm has ever stood. That contradiction is the entire mystery. The standard explanation for stone walls in this country is always farming. Clearing fields, marking edges. But farming needs flat ground, real soil, and a reason to be there. And this ridge offers none of the three. These walls bend in long serpentine lines across a slope too high and too steep to have ever been worth plowing. No homestead record, no livestock logic, no settlement at all. Somebody hauled and fitted heavy stone near the roof of a mountain, by hand, for a purpose that left nothing else behind. No house, no graves, no tools, just the walls. It's a staggering amount of labor for a reward nobody can point to. And in these mountains, effort with no obvious payoff has a way of turning out to mean the most. The doorway everyone walked through and no one studied down, where Kentucky, Virginia, and Tennessee press together, lies the single most famous doorway in American history. And almost nobody who walked through it ever looked up. The Cumberland Gap funneled hundreds of thousands of settlers west. Tucked nearby is Sand Cave, which isn't really a cave at all. It's an enormous sandstone overhang, an arched ceiling so vast and smooth it looks carved by hand. The rock banded in rust and gold and pink that shift as the light moves. It's one of the most staggering natural rooms in the region, and it sits right along the route that carried the entire westward tide of a young country. Daniel Boone, the Long Hunters, the wagons, all of it squeezed through this gap, and nearby are stacked stone features older than the trail records, older than the wagon ruts, older than the very name we gave the pass. And almost none of those travelers stopped to study what was already standing when they arrived. The fortress for a war nobody remembers. By now, the word fort should make you suspicious, and a Kentucky summit called Indian Fort Mountain earns every bit of it. Along its rim run low stone breastworks, set exactly as if to hold the high ground against someone climbing up to take it. Against whom, with what, and why are the questions that refuse to resolve. Because here's the flaw in calling it a fortress. There's no reliable water on top. None. Which means nobody could have held this position through a real siege, not for a day. A fort you can't survive in isn't a fort. It's a gesture. And the layout matches no conflict anyone has found in the recorded history of the region. So picture standing on that summit, ringed by walls built to repel an enemy who left no name, in a war that either never came or was never written down. We're halfway, and you may have already felt the floor start to tilt. The early mysteries were strange. The ones ahead are organized. And organization is the one thing the standard story keeps insisting these mountains weren't supposed to have. The marker above the tree line. The highest point in all of West Virginia is a windswept summit called Spruce Knob, where the wind is so relentless the spruce trees grow lopsided. Branches only on the sheltered side, whole forests combed flat by a permanent gale, and among those wind-bent trees sit cairns of stacked stone, weathered nearly level by centuries on the most punishing ground in the state. Their placement predates any recorded trail. Read that again slowly. Before the loggers, before the surveyors, before there was any path to follow up that mountain, somebody climbed to the highest, harshest, coldest point available to them, and chose, deliberately, to build there. Whatever those cairns marked was worth carrying heavy stone above the tree line, into a place that fights you for every single step. The coffins made of stone. The river country of Middle Tennessee hides a quieter kind of unsettling. The dead here were buried in coffins made of rock. The Mississippian people built what we now call stone box graves, lining the sides and floor with flat limestone slabs and sealing the body beneath a stone lid, a fitted container of solid rock for a single human being. Thousands have been documented, entire cemeteries of slab boxes, sometimes clustered across whatever flat ground a community could spare. And here's the detail that lingers long after you've left. The boxes hold adults and infants alike. The smallest graves, the ones built for children, were made with exactly the same care as the largest. The same fitted limestone, the same patience, the same craft, for a baby as for an elder. These weren't rushed or careless burials. This was a tradition, kept alive across countless generations, in ground far older than any county whose lines now run carelessly over it. The blueprint, with no city. Ask 100 people where the second tallest ancient mound in the United States stands, and not one will know. It's in Tennessee, the centerpiece of a complex called Pinson Mounds, around 17 of them above a river, raised in an era we call the Middle Woodland period. The tallest climbs about 72 feet, an artificial hill built entirely by hand roughly 2,000 years ago, then quietly left out of the national story. But the height isn't what sets this place apart. It's the plan. These mounds aren't scattered at random. They're arranged with clear geometric intent, placed in deliberate relationships to one another, the way a city is laid out on paper before a single building goes up. Somebody drew this before they built it. They had a design, a vision, a sense of the whole. It's the blueprint of a city, executed in earth and sweat. For a city that somehow never quite appears, the floor is about to drop out from under the timeline. Everything you've heard so far is recent compared to what's next. The tools left, beside the mammoths, at a place called Saltville in southwest Virginia, an ancient salt marsh trapped and preserved the deep past in its mud. And what came out of that mud rewrites how long we know people have been in these mountains. Mammoth bones, other Ice Age animals, and lying right beside them worked stone tools, human tools. The evidence points to people standing on this exact ground something like 14,000 years ago, at the very end of the last Ice Age. This is not a wall or a mound someone built. This is the raw, undeniable fact of human beings standing here while mammoths still breathed and the glaciers were still grinding their slow way north. Stone tools and butchered bone side by side at the ragged edge of a vanished world. Everything else on this list is recent by comparison. This is the deep end, and the water down here is very, very dark. 10,000 years in a single room. In the far corner of Alabama, where one of these old plateaus breaks apart, a single shelter of limestone holds something almost impossible to picture. Roughly 10,000 years of human life, stacked in one room. This place, called Russell Cave, was occupied on and off, nearly without a break, across that entire span. And the floor kept the record. Excavators dug straight down through layer after layer of human living. Tools, ancient hearths, the remains of meals, burials, each level a different age of people using the same dry overhang for the same simple reasons. Shelter, warmth, a roof against the rain. It's one of the longest unbroken records of human presence anywhere in North America, written vertically into the dirt of one cave. Think about that span. Whole civilizations rose and fell on other continents, while families kept lighting fires on this exact patch of ground. Century after century, the same shelter, the same dry floor, the same firelight, flickering across 10,000 years. The wall shaped like a living thing. On a ridgeline in far eastern Kentucky, near a river called the Big Sandy, there's a wall that flatly refuses to behave like a wall. Instead of running the straight, sensible line a boundary wants, it bends. It undulates across the land in a long, sinuous curve that reads less like masonry and more like a body in motion. And shaping land into the form of an animal isn't unheard of around here. The great serpent earthworks of the Ohio Valley are its famous cousins, enormous creatures sculpted into the ground, for reasons we still only half understand. This one curves with the contour of the ridge, oriented to the terrain rather than to any fence line need. And a boundary wall has no reason on earth to curve for beauty. Geometry doesn't bend like that by accident. Somebody wanted the shape itself, Somebody wanted a serpent of stone laid across a Kentucky ridge, and we may never know what it was meant to watch over or to keep away. 3 left, and this is where the experts go quiet, because the closer we get to the end, the less the textbooks have to offer. The capital we never named returned to the Georgia foothills and faced the largest thing on the entire map. The Etowah mounds are the surviving heart of a true city, anchored by a flat-topped earthen pyramid that rises about 63 feet. 6 full stories of packed earth, raised by hand, basket by basket. This was no burial pile. This was a platform, a stage for the rulers of a layered society that farmed, traded, governed, and read the heavens from the summit of a mountain. They built themselves out of dirt. And the people who dug here pulled carved marble statues out of the ground, seated figures with calm, careful faces, the portraits of a people we can describe in detail, study, hold in our hands, and still cannot name. A real capital stood here, with priests and rulers and astronomers and crowds going about their lives in the Georgia foothills. We simply never learned the word they used for the place they called home. The 2 civilizations buried together. When the first pioneers reached a spot in Ohio where 2 rivers meet, they did something that tells you they understood exactly what they'd stumbled onto. At what would become Marietta, they found a large ancient burial mound raised by the Adena 2,000 years before. And instead of leveling it for farmland, which they easily could have, they built their own cemetery around it. They ringed that ancient monument with their own 19th century graves. They even preserved the great earthworks nearby, including a raised processional avenue they named the Sacra Via, the Sacred Way. So in one quiet place, you have the dead of 2 civilizations sharing the same consecrated ground, separated by 2,000 years, and joined by the very same instinct about the spot. Those settlers could have plowed the whole thing under without a second thought. Instead, standing in front of someone else's monument, they recognized it as holy, and they wanted to be buried there too. The structure that breaks the timeline. And at the very bottom of this list waits the one that simply breaks the timeline we've all agreed to live by. Picture the most isolated, most deliberately engineered enclosure of everything we've walked through. A ringed work of earth and stone raised on high ground in the northeastern Tennessee uplands, far from any decent farmland, and aligned so precisely to the sun that the walls themselves keep a calendar. The light falls exactly where it was meant to fall, on the exact mornings it was built to mark. Building this demanded real engineering, the moving and shaping of an immense volume of earth and stone. And that demanded everything the standard story is so reluctant to grant the ancient people of these mountains. Coordinated labor, a food surplus to feed the workers, long-range planning, a population organized enough to spend years on a structure that grew no crops and fed no one. And there's no writing to credit, no inscription, no carved name, nothing but the work itself, standing there, refusing to be explained. The precision points to astronomers. The scale points to an organized society with leaders and laborers and a shared purpose. And the textbooks have spent a very long time insisting that neither of those things was supposed to exist on this ground. Look at the wall. Then look at the word primitive. They can't both be right. The oldest mountains on Earth are covered in work we still cannot read, raised by people we have spent far too long underestimating. So tell us about the one near you, the wall, the mound, the old thing nobody can explain. Subscribe, and the next investigation is waiting for you right there on screen.